And also, just to let you know, we are recording the session right now. So if you don't want to be recorded, just keep your mic and your camera off. And also, I'm sure Ben would love to take any questions you may have. So go ahead and drop it in the chat box at the bottom right here, and I'll start feeding it to him throughout the session. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Ben Parker of Kronologic.
Hey, thanks, Vivian. Hey, everybody. Thanks for sharing part of your busy conference schedule with me. Promise I will try to keep it tight and useful, and we'll move through the content quickly. At the end of this, I am going to distribute a kind of templatized deck that I've used throughout my career to win more projects with the Revenue Ops Curmudgeons. I say that because I view myself as one. So give me 1 second here. I will share my screen and we will get into it. Okay. All right. Confessions of a Revenue Ops Curmudgeon, how sales leaders can get the green light for new tech, new reps, and new projects. I'm sure if you are in this session, it is because you work with, or at least have worked with, a revenue operations leader, and you probably feel like this must be their outlook on life. For those of you who don't watch Parks and Rec, Ron Swanson is a phenomenal curmudgeonly character who famously likes to distance himself from anything that requires effort or stress. Hopefully, the next 20 minutes will illustrate that that's usually not what's happening within revenue operations, but even if it is, the way you can give yourself the absolute best shot at advancing the very important projects that you need in order to hit the always growing sales and revenue targets that lay in front of you. So sticking with the kind of curmudgeon thought, my CRO wanted me to tell you guys about the past roles I've had. He says it makes me special. I don't necessarily think that it does, but hey, I'll show you that I know what it's like to be in your seat as well as the seat on the other side. I have been a SDR BDR. I have been a SDR BDR manager. I have carried a bag as a inside-outside hybrid sales rep. I have been a marketing operations manager, a sales ops manager, and then my last gig in corporate America was honestly a pretty amazing dream job. I kind of got to take on the skunkworks projects of whatever the most important large-scale challenges were to the business that I was working for, and that is a 31,000 person company operating in every country around the world. So it was a pretty amazing experience. And not only did I have to execute on a lot of projects that were brought to me by revenue team leaders, but I also had to vie for budget and headcount to get approval for my own. And a lot of those were focused around how do we better support revenue teams? How do we better support the goal of growing revenue globally? So I'm going to start the session off with a little anecdote. It is about how I got myself fired the first time. And luckily, I had a promotion waiting on the other side of it. But the reason that I'm going to start with this is because this was really kind of, I would call it, I guess, my awakening into the way of thinking and structuring proposals in such a way that they would very frequently get approved within the corporate environment. And basically, it all started with bargaining with myself. I was a rep at the time, and I doubt that there's anyone out there that gets up in the morning and goes, man, I can't wait to cold call, right? But I really didn't love it. And I knew that if I was ever going to have success in the role, I needed to create a opportunity for myself to feel like I was winning, even when I was having the phone slam down on the receiver or having the door shut in my face if I was out knocking. And so I started doing the math that every sales rep and every sales leader with any time under their belt has done. And it really started with the question of like, how can I know that the effort and the pain that I'm putting myself through today is going to get me paid next quarter, and not just my base, because who wants that when you're in sales? I wanted to know, that I was going to make some real money next quarter. And so you start working down this chain. How many deals do I need to win to hit those accelerators? How many deals do I need to qualify if I'm going to win that many? Then I started getting into, okay, well, how many people do I just need to speak to in order to qualify that many deals? And then ultimately, how many leads do I need to process in order to speak with that many people? And then kind of a light bulb went off. I needed to make this a game for me. Money is why I was doing this thing. Can I quantify in dollars how much each one of those milestones is worth? And so then I started just picking up a sheet of paper and running through the numbers. All right, ACV of the solution I was selling was about 50,000. I win about 21.5% of the deals that I put in qualified pipe. If I meet with somebody, there's a little better than a 50% chance I'm going to get them to turn into an opportunity. And I know that for every 100 leads I work through, I'm going to get 15 meetings out of it. And then I had a light bulb go off. Hang on a second. That means the act of picking up the phone, knocking on the door, sending the email, the act of making that attempt to contact is worth a little less than $900 in quota retirement every time I do the act. And then it hit me that we had been sitting in a meeting, a QBR, a couple of months ago, and someone had brought up that we were just throwing away thousands of leads every quarter, and not throwing out the MQLs or anything like this, but leads that had interacted, leads that had had some interaction with the brand, but sales and marketing didn't determine that they were ready for human contact yet. And so I just started thinking about this with someone that I was working with at the time, and ultimately became a fellow co-founder of mine at Kronologic. And we started working through this thinking, okay, well, this isn't just a me issue or a you issue. This could be floor wide. What could we do if we could shift the limiting factor of the system away from just your human time in the day and prioritization of following up with the best leads? After all, that's why lead scoring even existed, and why those SLAs around leads of various types existed, all to allow for prioritization, because the bottleneck was the head count. And so we just started working down this path. And ultimately, the math got a lot harder. A lot more questions popped up. What does the time from generation to contact actually impact the dollar value of that lead? Is it different for A's versus D's? If so, how much? And all of these other questions that we asked. And I will openly admit, we probably paralyzed ourselves with analysis for a little too long. But what we kept arriving at over and over and over again was that if we could execute on this hunch that we had of finding a way to automate just the simple act of trying to get a meeting scheduled with these individuals, we could very likely double the actual pipeline output of the inside sales organization. But we didn't know, there were all these questions remaining around if we could hold that close rate constant. We thought we could, but we didn't know. So anyway, we decided, hey, if we're ever going to get a shot at this, we've got to convince a few executives to let us stop doing our day job and actually make a run at this. And so we put together a presentation, and this was the opening slide. exactly as it was on that day, minus the K logo, the K favicon in the corner there. But this was the presentation that we started off with. And we, over the course of about an hour with a room full of executives, talked them through why we thought so strongly that they should allow us to, kind of jump into this special project and see what we could do there. There were literal scoffs in the room when we showed this slide. But over that ensuing hour, there was enough meat on the bone in how we were proposing we would do this and measure it that we ultimately got the thumbs up to give this a try. We fast forward 6 months after running this with a team in the Americas, and turns out we did double the overall pipeline created by that organization. And as we tracked that pipeline through the ensuing 6 months, we actually doubled the revenue output of that team. Their all-time record had been of 27 million, and we ended up at 54 6 months into the future. The piece here, and this is where we're going to spend some more time today, because this is how you win operations leaders and convince them to do your will, is that we had done the math on the front end to be accurate to within 1% of our original forecast on both dollar amount and time. I will openly admit there was definitely luck there, but we were pitching this in October, saying in the second week of April, this is what we should see. And we saw it on the third day of the second week of April. We had succeeded in shifting the fundamental limiter of the system away from headcount requests and into lead volume. And we had reduced headcount in the org from 38 to 25 over the course of that year. Luckily, everybody was positively attrited. I was included in the headcount that ultimately went down, but ended up running a team after that and getting to a lot more of these special projects. So, okay, cool. But Ben, I came here so that you could tell me how to do this, not that you did it. That's great. We are going to get into that. As we get into that, it's important to start with understanding why an ops teammate or an ops leader might feel like a curmudgeon to you. Ron Swanson, again, frequently my spirit animal. I like to not get involved in these matters or any matters of any nature. That's really not how I view the world. I wouldn't have started a company if that was it. But one would be very easily forgiven for thinking that, most revenue operations or sales operations or marketing operations leaders go through life feeling this way. Let's start at the highest level, the function of operations within a company. In the simplest terms, your job on the revenue side of the house is make that top line number really big. Operations job Okay. I got a notification that I lost connection, and it's saying I'm connected again. Vivian, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. So at the highest level, this is where operations plays. Now, this is within your own specific company. The emphasis that company leadership is going to put on that middle section changes. As a seed stage company or a Series A company, profit is almost like a dirty word. Like we're in the land grab phase of the business. Nothing that we do in the seed to A has to ultimately be scalable to thousands of users and hundreds of customers. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is just prove that we can get top line going. So if you're the allocation of resources into the operations team at that point is usually very small. As a company matures, especially as you get to B, C, and beyond, and once you're an IPO, expenses and the reduction of those expenses and the efficiency of that overall system become much, much more important. Now, because of this, operations tends to be kind of the third, fourth mouth at the table when it comes to the political landscape. So an example that I use all the time is 10 headcount just got freed up company-wide. Marketing says they need 5, sales says they need 7, and operations says they need 5 if they're going to support all of the things that marketing and sales want to try to do, and CS wants to try to do. Marketing will get 2, sales will get 7, ops will get 1. The workload doesn't change at all, though, because now sales still has to support this additional extra person. Marketing is still going to ramp as many of those campaigns as they possibly can. We're all still going to push towards that, towards the money machine outcome that the investors and the executives love to see, knowing that if I, through a digital mechanism, drop in $1, I'm going to get $3 back. All of that work still exists, but you are now doing it with a significantly lower headcount allocation than many of the counterparts who you're expected to support. Not making excuses, we all deal with those constraints, but they are very real, and the feeling that your needs are definitely coming second, third, or fourth at best is very real for operations leaders. They're also a significantly lower headcount priority, but we kind of touched on this piece. Another piece to consider is that some operations personnel, and especially leaders of a certain title level, carry actual legal liability. There are dedicated offices or dedicated positions for this sometimes, like CISO and DPO and numerous other acronyms that companies are doing an important thing and bringing on these days. But make no mistake, if during implementation that ops leader overlooks a significant milestone in making sure that the systems are following best practices and are set up as securely as possible, and that new tool or process compromises sensitive data, there's a real chance that at a minimum this person is getting fired, and a lot worse can happen. GDPR and the advancing privacy landscape throughout the globe right now has a lot of teeth. And so if it feels like they might be taking their sweet time in determining if they're going to be able to comply with these laws by adopting one of your new projects, just understand they really are trying to get it right, because the teeth in these laws are real, and they definitely exist. Personality traits of your typical operations leader. It strikes me, and I hope it strikes you, that these personality traits are almost in direct opposition to what your typical sales hire is, or your typical sales leader might be. Your ops person, your average leader in ops, is going to be risk averse and skeptical, as well as pragmatic. There's also a way of communication and a way of ingesting information that ops leaders prefer, and one that they despise. And the one that they despise tends to be the way that salespeople communicate most often. And we'll actually get into that on the next slide. Some really good qualities that a lot of ops leaders possess is that they are both deliberate and autonomous. Once a decision is made, they're going to drive that through to fruition very frequently on their own volition. And there's one down there that if you're on this meeting, you're probably shocked that it's down there, but they're accommodating. The question is, how do we get them to be accommodating? And that is where the mechanisms through which we communicate become super important. So Aristotle once said there are only three ways that you persuade anybody to do anything. All of your arguments around trying to persuade somebody can generally be broken up into three main pillars: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos being obviously credibility, but also authority, right? Who's telling me to do this thing? Is it someone that I've never heard of, or is it the leader of my organization, or even that leader's boss? Pathos, emotion. Is this going to make me feel better, feel worse? Is this going to make me happier, sadder? Am I going to be excited, scared when I do this? And then logic, which is, logic. Does it make mathematical sense? If I operate through a series of logical gates, do I arrive at the solution that you're prescribing? When dealing with operations leaders, they choose to ingest that information, and they give credibility to arguments that rely almost nothing on pathos, very, very slightly on ethos, and are super heavily logic driven. So when and any good salesperson knows people buy emotion. They buy the story and they buy the emotion. That is why it is frequently so difficult to sell into operations leaders. We experience it at our own company. Operations leaders are a integral and important part in every deployment that we have. But if you come into that technical review meeting or that operations kind of sign-off meeting with the same message and the same set of arguments and the same communication style that you use to persuade your VP of sales or your VP of marketing to do something, almost invariably, if their camera isn't on, I can tell you there will be some eye rolls. If you structure your argument such that you're providing them an obvious logical series of answers as to why they would want to do this thing, it's much easier for them to ingest that information and understand why they would want to do this. All right, so getting into how we get the green light for the project, the tech, or the team. Really, step one, find an executive stakeholder. I cannot overemphasize how important this step is. And the reason goes back to that lower headcount and budgetary priority. As an operations leader, I would get a directive coming down from senior leadership that would say, this is the challenge in the business that needs to be solved. This is how much time you have to come to me with a late stage proposal full of budget allocations of how we're going to do that. And then once I pick a direction to run in, you're going to run in that direction at full speed every day until it's done. When another leader or another worse, if someone else comes into that mix and wants me to hop on this cool project that they've got an awesome idea for, if that doesn't have an executive stakeholder who I can credibly go to these senior level executives and say, hey, we've got this other thing that's really important. Can I put your project on the back burner? There's a chance I lose my job, right? And so understanding the political landscape and the need to have that executive stakeholder is extremely important. The second piece is arm yourself and that executive stakeholder with the right information formatted correctly for that operations leader. And I'm going to show you exactly what this looks like in a couple of slides. If your directive isn't coming from an executive stakeholder and you need to go find an executive stakeholder, as I had to in the anecdote at the beginning of the story, you can still arm yourself with a lot of the right information formatted in a very good way that gets that executive stakeholder on your side. And the reason I say that is because at the highest level, ops, finance, and your senior executives care about two things. Thing number one is ROI. We're all super familiar with ROI. There's not a person on this call who doesn't know how to define that. You probably use it in every single one of your sales cycles. But the other element on here is internal rate of return. And it is a really hard question to solve. And it is, how do I deploy my limited capital most effectively against all the possible choices that I have in front of me to most rapidly or most effectively increase shareholder value? Don't worry, I'm not going to teach a class on IRR. You probably don't even need to know how to run that function in Excel in order to win the arguments and get the sales ops and revenue operations leaders on your side. Just be aware that they're using this as a framework to evaluate which programs get funded. And at the simplest way to boil this down, what they're evaluating is, if I can only fund 3 projects and I've got 10 on the board, how do I most reliably narrow that down to the 3 that are most likely produce the highest ROI? And so you could come to a leader with an 8x ROI program, and that leader could come back to you and say, no, we're not going to go with that. And you would rightfully be frustrated. But a tool you now have in your back pocket is you can ask them if they're shutting your program down. Obviously there's some finesse to how you ask this, but you can ask them, interesting. So the other programs that are going to get funded have a higher than 8x projected ROI, right? And at the very least, you get to keep the conversation going. And hey, you might learn that there's some really cool stuff coming down the pipe, and you might want to figure out how you can help in those and attach your personal brand within the company to those as they will get the attention in the future. Okay, third major pillar is show your ops counterpart how easy it is for them to prove the concept. And the fourth piece here is putting it all together. So these next slides they're almost verbatim what I used to get a program greenlit at my previous employer. And it's kind of funny. They're actually a sponsor of this event. I'm not going to name them by name, but I got them deployed at my previous employer using these next few slides. Always, always, always start off with an executive summary that clearly states the problem. So in this scenario, I was working on a contactability problem inside our own database, seeing that many of our accounts had either severely aged or no contact data at all in our velocity business segments, and there was no way we were going to hit the rapidly increasing sales targets if we didn't confront that problem. So the problem statement, the lack of accurate contact data in our CRM has become a major blocker in our ability to grow market share in our velocity business segments. It is unlikely we will make our sales targets without improved contactability. So that's going to get your attention of your sales leader. That's going to get your attention of additional senior executives. And that contactability problem, there's a solid chance that's involved in someone's MBO in operations. So proposed solution. Vendor that I had gotten to a short list of offers the ability to import data directly from their databases into our CRM and or marketing automation systems, as well as ensure that existing contact data stays accurate via an integration into Salesforce. Justifying this, we don't currently run a competitive solution to this, and the effort required to provide the concept and a pilot seems to be very minimal. Additionally, I had worked through my early conversations with the sales rep at the other company that their pricing model will allow for minimal downside exposure while creating the opportunity for huge ROI. And then always, hey, we can get into this more in the detail slides. An additional note, always, always, always throw in 1 or 2 bullet points around key context that if someone reading this might be resistant to it, you just want to rub a little salt in there and make them read it and make the decision that they don't want to move it forward. That vendor recently published a case study with our competitor, named the competitor, and has expressed an openness to doing the same with us in exchange for significant discounts. They meet. I went out of my way and pinged IT and just said, "Hey, someone wants to do this with our data. Can you give me a certification that they must have, in order for us to even consider this?" IT came back, said NIST 800-171. So I asked, after 2 emails with the vendor, realizing that they were compliant against that framework, threw that in as well. Right. Next, data slide. structure the argument logically. So in our segments, you can see that moving from left to right, we have a worsening contactability picture. The percentage of accounts with at least one contact is actually pretty abysmally low in our in our segments of these markets. And as soon as you start asking for multiple contacts, it gets shamefully bad, leaving us with literally thousands of contacts that we've been targeted in our territories and quoted against, but we don't even have a single reliable contact within that account. So making the case, it's unlikely we're going to make these sales targets without some investment here. Key highlights from the vendor and how they're going to attack that problem. They were specifically the largest government and SMB contact database in the industry. They guaranteed a 90% data accuracy within 6 months. They had a one click for the rep. If they're in Salesforce or they're on their customer site, it's one click to ingest these things into the database. They had functionality that worked with LinkedIn Sales Navigator. That was just another part of the stack that we had, right? Whenever possible, talk about how this new thing you want to bring in complements, not replaces. If you're talking about replacing, you run multiple risks, one of which might be your ops counterpart thought this last tool was the one that was going to save the day because all the sales leaders wanted it. So they spent all their time, effort, personal capital, and attached their brand to that last tool. And now you're asking them to throw that out. So if you never even want to have that fight, talk about how you complement, not directly displace. And then, a nod to what is likely to be the first or second question out of your ops leader's mouth is, okay, well, great. You just gave reps carte blanche access to a cost center, and they could just potentially hit this button over and over and over again. How do we stop that? Guess what? The vendor has thought of that. There are mechanisms in place to do this. Can I at least get you for 45 minutes with the other executives to see how we might be able to operationalize this? The third piece, when you are structuring this argument, it helps to follow a couple rules. Show a upper and a lower bound of what you project the ROI to be. That's why I've got two columns over here, because no one can credibly say at this point in your relationship with this vendor or this project or anything else that you want to do that it's going to work or not. And so based on all of the research that you've done, here's what happens if most things go wrong. Here's what happens if most things go right. Our sober expectation is that we're going to end up somewhere in the middle there, and somewhere in the middle is still a really good defensible investment. And guess what? If you're doing this analysis and you can't come up with the idea that like, hey, we might make more money than we spend here, it's probably not a project worth fighting very hard for. But basically how we got there was number of accounts without any context. So that was literally just summing these three cells. Number of accounts without any context. Then we said, okay, I asked the vendor this question really quickly. I said, hey, can you run this query and tell me the count that comes back? Sure enough, he did. The number of unique in-segment accounts with at least one persona matching contact, so the personas we sold to, in your data. They had 160,000 of them. The ACV in this market segment for us was 15,000. The list price for this vendor to do an annual subscription for all of our sellers that were in this market segment was about 24K. We knew we could get a solid proof of concept pilot going with about 50 of those reps for 6K. And where I got to this was some back of the napkin math, totally admittedly, but hey, speed of business, you got to find stuff that's going to work quickly and something that someone can remember. There is about a 1% chance if we had a contact, if we just had the contact, not marketing support, nothing. There is about a 1% chance that if we had that contact data, we could get them to a deal within 9 months. And so I use this 1.1% metric to say, if we can reduce the contactability problem, if we can reduce our gap by 10%, that means we find 952 contacts. That means we get 10 deals won. At our ACV, we're looking at 150K, meaning we come out giving $6.25 back to the company for every dollar the company gave. On the upside, where I think this could, I think it could credibly go, but in that pilot period, I don't want to, blow expectations out of the water either. Where I think it could credibly go, if we reduce that gap by 25%, also plausible, less probable, but also plausible, we're looking at 25 deals won, meaning we could pad an extra 375K into our team's bookings potentially within the next couple of months, putting us at a 15.5, 16x ROI. And in most situations, if you're talking about double-digit X ROI, you've got a safe investment. You're going to get the executive attention. That executive attention and interest is going to drive that ops leader attention and interest. And then the part that seals the deal is showing the minimal amount of work that is required to actually get to the proof point, right? Ops lives in a world where it can feel like it's never over. It can feel like even when you deliver on a massive project, now you are supporting that project, right? And so it can feel like you never can get to a point where you can decide clearly this is working or this is not. And so clearly illustrating how that can be done, how it can be done quickly, and how ops leader is only in here 1, 2, maybe 3, 4 times. Everybody else is in just as much, and the overall time commitment from them is actually quite small. That gives you the best possible chance to win that buy-in. That's what I've got. That's what I've used. I hope that's useful for you all. Happy to field any questions. Okay. What type of product was this, established or emerging? It was established at the time. Now, there was a new way that or a whole new set of functionality that actually allowed them to be a rep-facing tool at the time. So I kind of played to that as it being a more new and cutting edge, but the company itself was definitely established at the time. Great question. Any other questions? Vivian, any other questions out there? Okay. Which executives did I pull in? It's a great question, and also the order in which to pull them in. This is changing a little bit, but on new tech and new projects, marketing usually had a larger budget to begin with and more discretion in where that budget could get deployed. And sales was the beneficiary. So what I would frequently do is I would find a sales exec champion. I would have that sales exec champion introduce me to their marketing exec counterpart, and we would essentially co-present this thing that we want to do. And then with those two execs, we would go get the buy-in from operations. I would typically use operations as kind of the final proof point in can we get this done? Can we get this deployed? Will this complement our existing stack and processes? Simply because if you go to them first, the default position is going to be no. It just will be. Their MBO is going to have already been set on deploying this other project, process, or platform. So know that going in and win your allies ahead of the fight. Okay. Have I done an analysis on intent data yet? Yes, but curious. Maybe Vivian, if that individual is still on, if we can get a little bit more detail around what exactly the question they're trying to answer is. Short answer: yes. Have done some analysis on intent data. I run a technology company which provides an integrated SDR call center. An integrated SDR call center with automated dialing and top data provided partnerships with AI ML solutions. How do I assist to achieve more connects? How do I assist my counterpart to get the green light? Okay. And when you're saying, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Your counterpart, is this, when you say counterpart, the internal to the organization, like your operations leader, maybe your marketing leader? How do I assist my counterpart to get the green light? Okay. Jeff, how are you able to present the ROI on intent data when you had no data to work with? Great question. In that environment, you want to be forthcoming and saying, we are early. We don't have data for how this would apply to us. But you definitely want to work with that vendor and ask them for relevant like data that they can share from other customers, right? So I was in a very large virtualization company. We had a couple different competitors out there. I noticed that one of those competitors was a Lighthouse account for this vendor, and I specifically asked them, "Hey, in their down market segments, can you give me a ballpark of how many credits they're consuming a year? When you did kind of your last ROI analysis with them, can you share ballpark with me where those figures came out so that I can craft my own argument?" And then it's the sales guy, right? So I kind of discount it, 25, 50%, whatever it is in my own mind, and just go, okay, I'm projecting an upper and a lower bound here to this executive. I'm saying if everything I've been told is a lie, the math still kind of supports we should work out at least here. If most of what I've been told is true, this could get pretty freaking big. I think we're probably going to end up somewhere in here, but for this minimal exposure, this minimum 6K exposure, I can probably get us to a really solid proof point that makes it easy to say, hey, these are the only things we're missing in making this big. Let's greenlight the additional funds. Let's dedicate, some time to working out these little kinks, and let's run this thing a lot bigger. Okay, the SDR leader at a potential customer who is evaluating my solution to get an approval for the pilot. So that very similar answer, kind of in reverse, right? You want to be providing them with as close to an analog as you can find within your existing customer set of what it would look like if you did well, what it would look like if you blew it out of the water, and what it would look like if you kind of stumbled out of the gates, right? and work with that counterpart to paint the picture for them how this can be a career year for you if we hit our execution points. Show them how in the QBR 2, 3, 4 quarters from now, they're the one giving the special presentation around how smart they were to bring in your services because you took the dollars that they invested and turned them into $10, $12, $15 back. Great questions. Perfect. Thanks, Vivian, for kind of corralling all of those and moderating the session. Like Vivian and I were talking kind of before this session. Last time I was at a 10Bound event, it was out in the Bay in San Francisco, and it was a fantastic event. So very much looking forward to doing this again in person whenever we can, and hope the session was valuable. We are going to distribute those slides if they're useful. I can tell you that I have used that framework to win the Greenlight on many internal projects in a corporate environment. So I hope you find them. Yes, and please do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any additional questions there as well. Thanks, everybody.